Only adults in the gallery. Viewer discretion is advised. Well, hello there. Welcome back. I'm so glad that you are with me tonight. My name is Gavin. This is my channel. On this channel, we like to do deep dives into the things that really matter within the true crime community. I like to say we like to cut through the fluff and the sensationalism of true crime. And if that is your deal, then you have found the right place. Now, today is a special video. This is part 1 of 3. I have a special guest that I'm going to introduce you to here in just a couple minutes. Normally on my channel, what we do is we take lots of questions, but I feel like we've got so much content that we're going to go through today. And you may have noticed that this is not a monetized video. YouTube, we're going to be talking about really grown-up stuff here. And YouTube tends to not like it when we do that, and they will demonetize videos. And what that means is the people who should see the videos never get to see them because YouTube doesn't put them out. So we're going to completely get rid of that. We're not going to monetize the video. We're not going to worry about it. We're not going to censor ourselves because we're talking about really difficult things here tonight. But what I am going to ask you tonight, for the purpose of YouTube getting the video out, will you please support the channel with super chats and super stickers? That helps YouTube to make money, which makes YouTube say, I want to get this in front of more people. I'm just going to ask you to do that. And then what we're going to do is the person who gives the biggest super chat tonight, we're going to give you a special gift. So that is my intro. With all of that out of the way, I want to introduce you guys to Anna Cenoda. She is a licensed clinical. Oh, I knew I was going to get this wrong. I need to bring up my notes, right? Licensed clinical social worker. She is the author of GROOM. Anna, thank you very much for joining me tonight.
Thank you for having me, Gavin. I'm so looking forward to this conversation and hearing what your audience has questions about regarding grooming.
Yeah, and I think that the reason that we started, you and I, talking to one another is there are some cases that have kind of come to the forefront in the true crime community that they've made us just go bonkers wondering why, how did this happen? The one that comes to my mind immediately right now is the case of Madeline Soto, right? This is a young girl that allegedly, according to police, was sexually abused for 5 years of her short life, starting at the age of 8. And it seems that nobody knew it. And so I'm really glad that we're going to talk. I'm glad that we're going to free ourselves from censorship. We're going to say the graphic words. We're going to talk deliberately about this. Why don't we start with, can you give us a little introduction to you and maybe talk a little bit about Groom and kind of where your career has taken you?
Sure, I'd be happy to. As you said, my name is Anna Cenoda. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, which means I have my master's degree in social work. And when I was training to get my degree, you are required as a student to engage in a practicum or an in real world experience. And one of the options that was available to me was to work as a clinician in a cognitive behavioral treatment center for convicted sex offenders. Now, I know most people watching, and probably you, Gavin, would think, why would anyone choose to work with convicted sex offenders? At the time, I had no knowledge whatsoever of sex offenders. I had no history myself. The issue didn't seem all that relevant to me, to be honest. And I was really curious about intimacy and maybe going into couples therapy or doing some marital counseling work. And so I thought, if I can handle the extreme of the extreme, then working with your average everyday couple is probably going to be a walk in the park.
Cakewalk, yeah.
Little did I realize, as all married people know, that's, it's sometimes a walk in the woods. But what I learned from that experience and the years I spent after I graduated in counseling, doing individual counseling, group counseling every week, and then, when relevant, couples counseling for the offenders and their partners. I had no idea that it would lead me to publishing a book and doing the work that you and I are doing today.
Oh, wait a minute. Are you talking about couples counseling when you're talking about an offender who has been charged with or convicted of a sex crime, and they're still married? So you're doing, or they have a significant other. You were doing couples counseling for those couples?
Exactly.
Wow.
So, one of the things that I took away from that experience, as you're going through your young life and you have clinical experiences, I moved into new environments, doing domestic violence work, doing drug and alcohol work, dual diagnosis work. And then I started having my own children. And I suddenly realized that the way in which I interact in the world with people that we know, maybe possibly strangers, but typically the people that are coming around our children are not strangers. Gavin, you're a dad
Right.
yourself. You know this. We
Yeah.
spend a lot of our time curating and being very intentional about who gets to spend time in our homes, around our children, what schools they go to. Most parents are diligent when it comes to selecting the people that are around their children.
Yeah.
And what I discovered was that so many of the conversations I was having with other parents at the playground or at the coffee shop was that they were worried about the exact opposite thing that I was worried about. I was worried about the extended family, maybe neighbors or people in my community. They were worried about the stranger in the crazy van, right? We've all heard
Yeah.
of that stranger danger line.
Yeah. I mean, that's the natural fear that I would have. Is,
Yeah.
yeah,
And
the guy pulling up in the white van, opening the door, taking the kiddos away, right? But you're saying the
exactly.
danger, that's not the danger. That's not the main danger.
Well, when we look at statistics, obviously we don't set our kids up to be unsupervised, in which strangers can take them most of the time. And by and large, parents are doing the best that they can. But what we know is that most individuals who are sexually abused are abused by somebody known and trusted, not only to them, but to their families. Now, that number is in decline, which is curious. That number used to be 93% of all victims were abused by somebody known and trusted. And it's gradually gone down a few notches. Do you have any guesses, Gavin, as to why that might be?
Um, no, like nothing comes to mind. I mean, in my family, we're far away from our family. Well, but we're not just talking about family. We're talking about close friends,
That's right.
people we go to church with, social and
That's
civic
right.
organizations, things like that. I have no idea.
So, one of the major developments in the lives of children and families have been things like social media. And
Of course.
many children nowadays spend, on average, 9 or more hours on a device. So, what we have to be conscientious of, not only as parents, but as clinicians, when we're guiding families and older children, we need to be really giving them the skills and tools they need to handle situations of individuals that they're meeting, not only in person, but also online. And hopefully, when we're talking about grooming today and in the coming weeks, we'll have an opportunity to drill into online grooming, because it's something that we're seeing a rampant increase of. And many agencies are playing whack a mole, to be honest,
Oh,
with predatory communities who are using the dark web and gaming platforms and social media platforms just to find identified targets. So, all that to say that my frustration with the absence of knowledge around this subject made me think, well, what's out there? What are the available resources or books for families like me if I hadn't had this experience? And what I came to realize, for anyone who's ever been in that section of the bookshop, you go in and every single cover has, tears and a teddy bear on its side and a dark cover. And it really made me scared. I hadn't even picked up a book yet. And already I was thinking, oh my gosh, I have such hesitation about even diving into what's available on the market, because the way that this has been wrapped up, the way that we have branded, so to speak, this subject
Yeah.
is pushing people away from it. It's not encouraging people to say, okay, right, we have a problem. Grooming is rampant and we need to get better tactics. So I began the process, hired a developmental editor when my youngest child was 6 months old, and wrote a book that is now called Duck Duck Groom, Understanding How a Child Becomes a Target, because I wanted parents to understand that it is a process. It is not lightning that strikes out of nowhere. It is not random. It is an intentional, selective process. And once you
Ooh.
know how predators work, you can actually interrupt the process. And I was getting so frustrated by other people in this field who are working so hard to prevent child abuse. I am working hard to prevent grooming, because if we know that grooming is involved in most cases, and when you speak to survivors of these cases, they say 97, 98% of the time they experience grooming, then we have some work to do. And
Trying to get a little higher up the funnel, right?
that's
As
right.
victims
Let's
are
go back
funneled
to the
in.
faucet. Yes, absolutely.
So
So I'm excited to be here.
one of the things that you and I talked about on the phone a month ago, whenever that was that we spoke the first time, you know, you mentioned, you have children. Kimberly and I have children. We have 5 kids. We worked diligently with our children, and I explained that process to you privately, to try to teach our kids that if something does happen, that we're you can trust us, you can talk to us about it. And the thing that occurred to me when we were talking was, well, all I've done is tried to react to something that has already happened, that is horrible. And what you're
Yes,
talking about
yes,
is let's prevent it from the very beginning. And that's I
yes.
mean, that's the reason that I was like, we've got to talk about this. We've got to take a long look at it, a deep dive at it. And so guys, we're talking, of course, about sexual abuse of children mostly, but one step above that is the grooming of children, getting them ready for that abuse, right? So I'm really excited. Now you're in the driver's seat on this one. I know that you sent over a presentation, so you just guide me if you want me to bring that up. I can bring that
Sure.
up, but just give me
Yeah,
the
you
the
can do
word.
that now.
Sure.
That's great. We can have that running as we discuss it. Um, I think one of the things that's so important is, and sometimes the true crime community can be guilty of this. We spend a lot of time focusing and discovering why people commit crimes. Why did they do it? What was going on with them. When we think about shows like Mindhunter and
Hmm.
deep dives into serial killers and things of this nature. And what I want to bring to this conversation is, I don't care how it was that they came to be. I don't care why they do it. What I want parents to know, because actually that doesn't keep us safer, what I want parents and grandparents and caring adults to know tonight is how they do it. How do they groom? Because if we shifted our focus into how they groom, then we would be in a ready position and we wouldn't be in as much of a defensive position.
You know what that comment reminds me of is when I was learning Spanish. I moved to Argentina. I served down there as a missionary when I was a kid. Preparing to go to Argentina, I had to learn Spanish, right? And man, that was a very difficult proposition for me. I had taken 5 years of French and could not speak a word other than maybe say Captain Picard's name in a good French accent. That's all I could do. It was so hard, and I was always asking, why is it this way? Why are we conjugating this way? Why is the grammar this? And my teachers would say, Gavin, it doesn't matter why. You need to stop asking why. And that's the hardest thing to let go of. It's an extremely hard thing to let go of. But the moment that I let go of it and just accepted that it doesn't matter why, it just is, that's when things started to click. So yeah, I'm all in on this. It doesn't matter why they do what they do for the purpose of this conversation. It just matters that
That's
they're
right.
doing it.
And a
So
great resource for individuals who may want to know more about sexual offenders and the psychology behind them is a resource called ATSA, ATSA.org. It
Okay.
has all the latest journals, all the latest research. It's a wonderful resource for individuals who do want to do that deep dive. And having sat in the room with convicted sex offenders, I took what I thought were the important pieces of how they operate and placed it into this book, because I think most parents, most grandparents actually don't care why they do it. I think they really care about how they do it. And that's going to put us in a position of empowerment and away from a position of paranoia or fear, which is
Perfect.
easy to slip into as a parent.
Yeah, I love it. I
So if
love
you
it.
want to scroll through, let's see where we are. So we've talked about this a little bit, but who's most likely to perpetrate sexual violence against a child? You've got a few options here. If you scroll in, we've got strangers, acquaintances and trusted adults, random individuals, and unknown people. Well, Gavin, what do you think the answer is?
Yeah, it's the people in your circle of associations, your acquaintances, your the trusted adults.
That's right. That's right. So let's keep going and we'll move on to the next. So, what is it? What's unique about children? You're a dad, you have kids. Many of your listeners and your audience tonight have children. Well, children are naturally curious. They are inherently vulnerable, even in ways that they are ignorant to, right? I had a
Yes.
conversation with my 6 year old uh, earlier in the week, and she said, "What day is it today?" Okay, so if there's an absence of awareness in the structure of the day, the structure of the week, where things are, that's vulnerability, and
Yeah.
we need to be aware that children are not small adults. They are developmentally at a very different stage than adults are, and predators can take advantage of that. And then you have some other examples here that most children are very trusting. And if somebody in a position of authority, whether it's religious authority, whether it's professional authority, like somebody in a medical role or an individual at a school who's in a position of power, they are automatically going to be trusting, because whether we have worked against it or not, many, many children are being raised to do what they're told and to follow order. And if
Yeah.
the principal calls you into their office, then you go. Now, I'm not saying we want rogue children running around the world, but I'm simply saying that we can't start this conversation without acknowledging a child's inherent vulnerability and their curiosity.
Understanding what is, right? It is that way. Kimberly and I, we joke sometimes, we roll our eyes. Oh my goodness, our son slash daughter, whatever, is so stupid. And we're saying that tongue in cheek. It's not stupidity, it's lack of
Of
experience,
course.
it's ignorance, right? It's those kinds of things. But those are the beautiful qualities of being a child, right?
Of
That's
course.
what's the curiosity and the natural wonder and the wanting to stretch and grow. But you're right, we all, especially as children, we want to fit into the societal norms, right? We're uncomfortable breaking outside of those norms,
Right.
especially when there's a person who's powerful. Um,
Absolutely. So
I
let's
was
go to the next slide.
I'm
Oh,
sorry,
sorry. Go ahead.
when I was in sixth grade, for example, when I was in sixth grade, I was bigger than my high school principal. I was way bigger than her, but oh man, she could put me under her thumb like that. I was dead frightened of
Ooh,
her, right? So I mean that's one of those
yeah.
things that uh, the childishness in us just is always there when we're kids.
That's right. That's right. So, what are we talking about? What is the scope of this problem? Well, the scope is that on average, 1 in 10 children will be sexually abused by the time they turn 18. This is far too many kids in my book, and I know
What
it's
are we
far too
talking
many.
about? What's our definition of sexual abuse here?
That's a great question. So, sexual abuse is exposure to sexual material. It could be exposure to exploitation, could be hands on crimes, could be individuals who, take flashers, taking their clothes off in front of children,
Hmm.
all the way to more and more heinous crimes.
Okay.
So, you're absolutely right. child sexual abuse is sort of a wide umbrella, and it's something that we can't necessarily pinpoint that only these heinous crimes are considered sexual abuse and these more minor crimes like touching or exposure to pornography or things like that are less heinous. But we have to almost see it as a soup.
I see. Well, and I would imagine that, like, if we put these on the spectrum from least serious, this is horrible English, but least serious to most serious, one probably leads to the other, right? It probably is a pathway that these kids are walked down.
That's a great
Is it?
point. So, what I recognized, I had offender after offender tell me, well, then I would do this. And if I got away with that, then I would move on to the next thing. And then I would move on to the next thing. So, there's a tremendous amount of testing, baiting and testing, and baiting and testing. And how does the child respond to this? And remember, children are inherently vulnerable and they have curiosity simultaneously. So many sexual predators understand this. They're good with kids and they understand how to use a child's developmental stage against them, which we'll get into later on during our discussion as
The
well.
scary thing about what you just said is that there are awesome people who are also really good with kids
Yes.
that you look at with suspicion because those are the shared, I guess, uh, characteristics of somebody who might be grooming children too.
But
That's tough.
what I hope what I hope will become clear is that most adults are not grooming kids. Most adults don't want to molest children, but the ones who do stand out in their behavior.
Oh,
They
okay.
stand out in their choices, they stand out in how they behave, they stand out with how they interact with children and with peers, adult peers in those environments. And if we were just more attuned, if we taught this to families, if this was something that we handed every new mom and new dad as they exited the hospitals, we could actually make a big dent in this problem because most adults are not grooming children, and most caring professionals in roles such as teacher, coach, religious professionals, religious clergy, etc., don't want to do this, but we rely on them to recognize when other people's behavior has gone awry and to call it out and to call it into action. And what we see again and again is that individuals who are around predators stay silent, whether for fear of consequences, fear of retribution, and that leaves all of us less safe.
Okay. Should I click again?
So,
Or we
yeah,
got
one of the things I just want to point out on the slide is that it's very important that we prevent child sex abuse because adult survivors have an increased likelihood of other additional challenges and struggles. You might have heard the term ACEs or adverse childhood experiences. And the higher your ACE score, the more likely you are to have chronic illness, substance dependence issues, utilization of medical services, etc. So, what I want to juxtapose that with, though, is that we have the opportunity as parents, as grandparents, as caring adults to inject pieces which are positive childhood events into the lives of our children. So, this is not all doom and gloom. Just like there are ACEs and there are things we need to avoid, like um, sexual abuse, domestic violence, incarceration of a parent, separation and divorce, there are also positive things that we can do to enhance the childhood experience.
all right.
All right, we can
Now it
move on
says
from there.
82% of children who are sexually abused are female and 18% are male, according to the reported statistics. It makes me wonder if there are maybe some disincentives for certain groups to report. So, how do you feel about that? Do you think it is about 80-20 like
No,
this, or
no,
no?
and that's why I'm politely using as much professional language as I can. Put that in parentheses because we have a real we've failed men in many ways. when it comes to this issue. When you look at survivor websites, when you look at agencies for survivors, many of them have a very overt female lens. And there is space in our world for opportunities for healing and growth for adult males, just like there is for adult women. And many of the men I talk to fear that they can't show that side of themselves. They might not have even shared it with their partner or their spouses.
Yeah.
And we as clinicians also must do a better job because we are sometimes even inadvertently reinforcing that the people who are victims of sexual crimes are females, not males. So, one area that I think we're starting to see this shape up a little bit is when we think about things like online grooming and online exploitation. Because I don't know if you were following some of the crimes with the Nigerian individuals who are exploiting young boys on
Yeah.
gaming platforms for
Yeah.
uh, money and so forth, and resulting unfortunately in the tragic loss of life for some of those young boys. And it's finally coming into the public view that we have to do just as much work for our young boys and our men as we do, and we have already established, for young women and adult women.
One of the cases that's in the orbit of the Madeline Soto case, which kind of brought us together, is her music teacher. My chair is collapsing here. Her music teacher was using Roblox to get little boys, allegedly, he was accused of this, to perform sexual acts. And they were little boys. So yeah, okay, I see what you're saying. It probably is not 80/20.
It's definitely not 80/20,
All right.
but that means that we have some room for improvement. And who knows, maybe tonight's conversation ignites someone to get the resources they need, get the help that they need, and for us to just change the conversation that being a survivor of child sexual abuse is something that is very common in our society, and we need to bring it more into the forefront to be able to talk about it no matter what your gender is.
Cool. All right.
So, this is an important slide. And what I want to pinpoint is that there is a process of selection that goes on for a potential predator. They do not groom everybody. You brought up earlier that caring adults who are maybe in school systems or other professions are really good people. They're wonderful mentors. They're excellent, potential counselors to our young people. And one of the things that I think is important to highlight is that predators are keen observers of children. What do I mean by that? I mean, they observe a child's home life. They observe a child's posture, the way that a child enters the room, what the child has, going on socially. And they are evaluating what are the potential vulnerabilities for this child. What is the home life? What could I exploit or use here? Because one thing that became very, very clear to me when working with convicted sex offenders was that they had started the grooming process on many, many more kids than they actually ended up molesting. Does that make sense?
Well, yeah, and it rings true to me. When we find people who have been accused, like Stephen Stearns in Maddie's case, of, I mean, just how egregious it was. It just feels to me like it was practiced. Like he couldn't have been this lucky the first time. I mean,
Mhm.
predation is hunting, right? So that's what they're doing. They're hunting. And for him to be that successful over the course of 5 years, I just feel like if I wanted to go hunt something, like taking the metaphor into the actual woods with an actual gun, I would not be successful my first time around, maybe my first 10 times around,
Mhm.
right? So yeah,
That's right.
that rings completely true to me.
So oftentimes the process starts and then it stops. It starts and then there's an interruption, whether it's, the predator loses interest, the child signals that, whatever they had perceived as a vulnerability is not a vulnerability. They have higher fences around them when it comes to things like supervision or adult contact. These are all things that a predator is keenly aware of. I had a client of mine that I worked with who would go to the mall. Remember the mall? Remember how we would
Oh,
go to the
yes, I
mall?
do.
Now we just go online. But there used to be a place called the mall, and everyone would go. And he would pose as a journalist. And he would solely seek young males who were between the ages of 11 and 13. Now,
Very specific. Oh my goodness.
yeah, so in that environment, he's not going in there to just meet anyone. He's got an identified group that he wants to meet. And then within that group, he's going to find somebody who's going to be, as we'll talk about later, who's going to fall within the trap that he's going to set. I think it's really important that we focus in, especially before we get into the rest of our discussion, that predators are the ones who are solely responsible. Victims and survivors of child sexual abuse are never responsible. And unfortunately, we have adults walking around this world who feel guilt and shame that was completely unearned, that the family mishandled the situation, the church mishandled the situation, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm trying to undo that. I really am trying to lessen the burden of shame and guilt by teaching people that grooming was a trap. And you find the vulnerable kid for whatever reason. Think back to the slide we had at the beginning. Children are sitting ducks. Well, you're at the mercy of the family you're born into, right, Gavin? Like
Sure.
you and Kimberly work hard to raise your children and share your values with them. Not all children are that lucky, and we must recognize that a child's inherent vulnerability is often at the mercy of the family they were born into, the socioeconomic situation, maybe the educational situation within their family system. So all the responsibility for sexual abuse falls on the predator. It never ever falls on the survivor of sexual abuse.
Now, I've got a couple questions from stuff that you just brought up. We're probably going to get into this in a little bit later, but
Sure.
A couple questions come to mind. Number one, and this maybe can just be rapid fire. Do
Yeah.
the people who are victims of sexual abuse, are they more likely to be abused if they are on the lower part of the socioeconomic ladder? If they're poor, are they more likely to be abused?
Well, this becomes a little tricky.
Okay.
What researchers have spent some time focusing on is, instead of socioeconomics necessarily, is things like family structure. And we know that children who are born into a two-parent family are less likely to be sexually abused than a child who's in foster care. A child who's in foster care is 10 times more likely than a biological child living with their two biological parents. A
Okay.
child, however, who lives with a single dating parent is over 20 times more likely to be sexually abused. So our
Wow.
highest risk factor actually is the dating parent, the dating single parent. Now, why do I bring this up? This is what we saw in the Soto case, this
Yes.
tragic case of a single mother who's raising her daughter. She meets Stefan. He sexually abuses her when years before, and none of the right action steps are taken. And he does it again, and it ends in her ultimate tragic loss of life. So I think it's really important that we recognize that vulnerability might come from being lower socioeconomics, but honestly, if you're in a lower socioeconomic community, but you've built a village around you, if you
Right.
have like-minded parents and grandparents, and you have this kind of knowledge, and you're putting it into place and practice, I think we cannot just siphon it down. I recently spoke to a group of women at a PTA meeting, and they said, one woman raised her hand and said, I'm not really sure why you're here to talk to us. And I said, oh, why is that? And she said, well, this doesn't happen in our kind of neighborhood. And I said, oh, what kind of neighborhood is that? And she said, well, we're all of a certain class here. And I think it's really, really important that we focus in on no class, no socioeconomic group, no education level, no race, no religious group is exempt from grooming and predation. And
Okay.
we see this in every environment.
The next question I had is you talked a little bit about maybe survivor's guilt, right?
Mhm.
Um, well, let's take church for example, because this is something that man has been in the news over the last now 15 years, where so many young men, mostly actually, were sexually abused by their priests. And by no means does that mean that it only happened in the Catholic Church. Just a very good example, right? It happens in every religious group. But one of the hardest parts that I see about that is that you talked about parents not handling it correctly, or the church not handling it correctly. The can you give us a little bit of an insight on what what should happen? You know, if you're in a little, I don't know, some non-denominational whatever group in Podunk, Western Pennsylvania, that's where I live, right? And something like this happens, and you're a leader in that church, and you know that or you're a parishioner in that church, and you are aware of something that's happened. What are people supposed to do? Because I feel like the natural inclination is to protect the tribe, right? You have your little community. You want to protect your community. You don't want, especially when it comes to religion, you don't want the world judging you for evil deeds that happened within your community, right? You've got that extra, um, I guess, incentive to not blow whistles on this, not shout from the rooftops. But what is it that we are supposed to do? Just
Well, you
black and
have
white.
a few, yeah, you have two really good options. You call DFACS, Department of Family and Children's Services, or Child Protective Services, depending on what state you live in, and you report every detail that you know, what you heard, what you saw, what somebody told you. Give as many names as you can. You can stay anonymous when you make these reports. And then it is up to that department to investigate and follow up. The other option you have is to call the authorities, call the civil authorities, not call the head of the church or the board or your neighbor or your friend down the street. We've got to do a better job of reporting. 30% of all child sexual abuse gets reported. So that means that
Only 30%.
70%, that's right, 70% of all child sexual abuse never gets reported to the authorities. So we have a grave problem when it comes to reporting. And this example of churches, I would say any private institution, private schools, athletic clubs. We're seeing, I don't know if you're watching the um, uh, recent documentary on Netflix about Ohio State and the young men who were abused by a medical
Right.
professional. We don't need to just call the boss of the person who is harming people. We actually need to go steps and steps above that, because many people who are around predators are silenced. They have also been groomed. This is not exclusive to the
Mm,
child. This is a system by which we've got to manipulate all the adults around in order to build assurance. You can trust me. Your child is safe with me. I'm the one that you can count on. And that is the perverse part, because it makes children, uh, more than shame, it makes them have doubt about their ability to read people and to trust their gut. And that is one thing that we know is built into us, each and every one of us, for our own safety and protection. And when your environment says, shh, don't say anything, keep that quiet, that didn't happen, nobody's going to believe you, we don't want to cause any ruffles or ripples in this community,
yeah.
then you know your place as a child.
Yeah, that's horrifying. That whole idea is just horrifying, that okay, I'm in a little community, an athletic club, a church, a civic organization, a school, whatever, and I am sexually abused, and I go to the people that I trust the most, my parents, uh, my ecclesiastical leader, my coach, or whatever, and
Hmm.
and they don't, they don't act. That is absolutely horrifying to me, and it's just been in the last about year that I have become aware of a personal friend of mine who came out about a year ago to tell the world when he was a Boy Scout that this happened to him. He talked to his parents, he talked to his religious leaders, and everybody was like, "We're going to handle this for you." And now here he is, 40 something years old, and dealing with the consequences of that. It's just horrifying to me that adults won't stand up and know what's right. Just like, I'm calling the sheriff, or I'm calling the police, I'm calling 911. And the other thing that we live in a small community here in Pennsylvania, but I come from a larger place. We lived in Sacramento, California, so certainly not like giant metropolis, but several million people in the greater area, right? Within our area, though, are just little areas. And so what I'm getting at is, even when we lived in a big area, my parents were on first name basis with the sheriff. My parents were on first name basis with one of the district attorneys. You know, and here in a small place, it's way easier. Right? I know the chief of police, I know the sheriff, and all the three counties all around. I know the DA, I know them all, and so I feel like I'm in a really good position that if I find out something has happened to a loved one, I know the calls that I make, and I know who I follow up with if nothing happens, right? And so I
Hmm.
guess what I'm getting at is, even if you're like in one of the five boroughs of New York City, make relationships with the people who have the
Hmm.
power to, um, I guess, on the law and order side of things, right? Who can make arrests, who can prosecute crime, build those relationships. It's easier in small places, but you can still do it in big places. I guess that's my soapbox. It drives
I'm
me
really
crazy.
glad you brought I'm really glad you brought that up. And I also think that we can teach children that they can also call child protective services. I think, if we're handing children smart devices with capabilities beyond compare, then we need to also let kids know that they can make reports about situations that are happening to themselves or their friends or family members, because any of those barriers for calling the authorities have been removed. And it's extraordinarily important when we think about those scenarios that the of those reported cases that we talked about a few moments ago, that 30% is reported,
Mm-hmm.
50% of those are thrown out because there's no evidence. So if you're a parent, if you're a grandparent, one of the things you need to do is to be a keen observer, because these behaviors, just like you were illuminating earlier, Gavin, they build upon themselves. The more heinous crimes happen after other crimes have happened in um, in the earlier time that they've had access with that child. So it's critically important that we're keen observers and that we document things, that we document, weird gifts that might show up or behaviors of an individual, so that when we make these reports, we have a little bit more of a leg to stand on. Because otherwise, it's, well, my child told me this, and the adult says, no, they didn't do it. And guess what? The adult has prestige, they have charm, they have a bevy of adults who stand by them and say, oh, yeah, he's a great dad, he's a great husband, he's, such a keen provider to our community. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what children and victims are up against.
All right. Yeah, that's that's horrifying. It's just like, I don't know what to do other than laugh. Like, the no, it's just actually, let me just add to this real quick. As a person who observes courtroom proceedings as part of my profession, witness testimony is just as powerful as physical evidence. Witness testimony, I mean, actually, out of all the different kinds of evidence that is presented in court, witness testimony from a credible witness is probably the most powerful that I always see. So when you're talking about being a keen observer, taking notes, documenting things, you would then later be able to witness in court to the things that you know firsthand, not just the things that you heard, because you wouldn't be able to testify to those kinds of things in court. So I'll just add that to what you were saying, that witness testimony is extremely important. So be a focused observer, I guess.
That's a great point. Do you want to go to the next slide?
Sure.
So when we're looking at the problem of predators, we're mainly dealing with males, but we recognize that those are, again, we're almost dealing with faulty information here, because if only 30% are reported and then 50% of those are thrown out, the sexual predators who are referenced in these statistics are in that 15%, right? They're not the whole swath of the situation. And I don't know if your audience has been following, but there does seem to be a growing group of female predators, especially within school systems, who are getting indicted or charged with sexual offenses against children. So in no means, it's sort of like the earlier slides with based on the research we have, right? But according to arrest records and incarceration, 95% are males. Take that with a grain of salt, because it does not mean that females are never sexual offenders, but it does mean that we have to be cognizant of the fact that most men are the ones who get arrested. You've been in courtrooms. I'm sure you've seen a few female offenders up on the stand, and we as a society are very lenient on female sexual offenders compared to male offenders. And that's something that I think is at play here when we look at these statistics.
Well, they even make jokes about that. Like Saturday Night Live famously had jokes about the high school kid testifying in court about the two teachers that he slept with, and, like joking about that. And I think that might go towards, like, okay, if you see something like that on Saturday Night Live as like, it's a big joke that a high school kid would have sexual intercourse with a teacher. If you are one of those high school kids that has been abused by a teacher, you're a young man, what's the likelihood that you're going to tell anybody that? You're not going to be taken serious.
That's right. It's almost, we could have a whole session, we could have a whole evening just about female sex offenders. But it's almost as if we look at it as a rite of passage, or even as a good thing to happen to young boys, to have an older female who can be an educator and sexually guide him, etc. Now, if the tables were turned, we would look at that as a predatory situation. So It's no different in my eyes, but from a societal perspective, we have a very distorted view of older females having sexual contact with children, which is still abuse.
Yeah. 93% of cases, the predators are known and trusted, right?
That's right. That number's going down a little bit. Some statistics say it's 89% now. I tend to think that 90% is a good ballpark for your listeners to be aware of. And the other thing that's important on this slide is that 70% of child sex abusers have up to 9 victims. So when we're thinking about, it's just me, it's only happening to my family, I'm not going to call it in, I'm not going to report it, it wasn't intentional. What I want people to remember is that you might be you don't know where you are in the line, right? Are you number 1? Are you number 7? Could your actions, could your reporting, could your speaking up, could your interrupting the grooming process alter the course of someone else's life or the life of another family just by speaking up? Because these are serial offenders. These are not individuals who stop preying on children. And I think we need to be aware of the high amount of victims that they typically have.
All right. Yeah. Oh, I've been excited for this slide.
So when I think about this scenario, it was very important for me that we make this digestible and understandable to people who don't have whether clinical backgrounds or experience directly with convicted sex offenders. And one of the things that came out of my research was that predators run on gas: grooming, access, and space. What do I mean by that? They, by and large, groom their victims and their victims' caregivers or the surrounding adults of that individual. They need access. Where does access come from? Access can come through being a family member, through school, through activities, through sports. It can also come online. Predators don't even need to walk into my house to abuse my kids. They can access them through gaming platforms, as you brought up earlier with Roblox, or through social media platforms. And then they also need space. So they need a space in which to abuse the children. So what are some available spaces? Well, homes are where most abuse occurs. 82%, in fact, of all child sexual abuse occurs in two places: the home where the child lives and the home where the predator lives. So it's incredibly important that we as parents and grandparents and caring adults are attuned to this information. So it might alter our plans for, bringing everybody into our home. It might alter who we send our children to as far as homes go. And we also need to remember that more and more families are allowing devices to be used inside the home when we're cracking open a world that we sometimes don't even know the boundaries of. And that's really important. So if you go to the next slide, this will all make a little bit more sense, because child sexual abuse requires all three of those ingredients. And this is something that I think if we just shared this image alone, we would do a lot better for our families and our children and our caring adults. Because one of the things that often gets lost in this conversation is, I'm an adult. I want to be able to volunteer at my child's school. I want to be able to chaperone an overnight trip. I want to be able to, be in my religious environment with my family or other people's children. Now, I need to think about my own reputation, not just protecting children, but we need to think about protecting those adults who are mentors, who are teachers, who we do see showing incredible commitment and dedication to children on a daily basis. But oftentimes those individuals are in environments that we're not in. I'm not in school with my children. I don't know if you were in the school environment with your children.
Nope.
And we need to rely on those individuals to recognize the grooming process, because they are going to be the ones who have the proximity to see something. Now, in our homes, it's a little bit different. With the Maddie Soto case, as you brought up earlier, there were many examples of grooming that were not handled. The sleeping situation. Oftentimes, the offenders I talked to would use situations around toileting, dressing, showering, bathing, and sleeping in order to test a child and have more and more heinous crimes against those children. So your child's bedroom is incredibly precious. And for Maddie to endure the abuse that she did in her own room, because it was by and large accepted and even pushed and encouraged, for her to be sleeping with a grown man is unimaginable. And one of the things I write about in my book is some of those practical parental just expectations that we need to have around bedrooms, because that is a high touch point when it comes to predation inside our homes.
Yeah. Thinking about volunteering, let's see, I don't want to go too detailed here, but I discovered early on in my relationship with my wife that there were trust issues with men. And one of the things that, when we were expecting our first child, Kimberly was having a real hard time with the idea of even trusting me with our own child. And, and that obviously came from somewhere. And so I've always taken a position of being very overt about how open I am. Like, take church, for example. I will never go into a classroom with kids with the door shut. I would never do that, right? I'm not, for my own reputation, for I mean, the kids aren't in any danger, but I don't want anybody to believe that they're in any danger. So if I'm ever in a place with children, mine or my own, or not my own, in a public setting, the doors are open. The
Right.
everything is in view. So I think that's, I don't know if what I'm doing is the right thing to do, but I've always kind of done it out of self-preservation. I am more afraid of being accused of doing something like that than almost anything else in the world. I fear it. So,
I think you're not alone. I think a majority of men are in the same boat as you. And one of the things that we need to seek in our institutions and the agencies that take care of our children and our youth centered activities is to ask them, what are the policies that are in place here to protect my reputation? Because if I work, you brought up the Boy Scouts earlier. The Boy Scouts has done a complete 180. There's obviously still room for predation in any environment, but they have such strict expectations of the adults. This sense that you're going to have two adults for different environments with children. You're never going to be alone with a child in those settings. These are the sorts of things that every parent can ask about. I ask about it. This should not be taboo subject. We should be putting it out there into the ether and saying, what are the policies you use? How do you design your space? I had the opportunity to meet with an architect who was building a school, and she came to one of my lectures and she talked to me afterwards and she said, what do I need to be doing from an architectural standpoint to decrease the likelihood that abuse can occur within this school? So we had a really interesting chat about
wow.
the things that you just brought up, which is how are the doors structured? How are the walls structured? Are there windows? Are there windows into the classroom? Many school systems have like that one little tiny window, and some teachers even cover it. So
Mm-hmm.
if I'm if I'm a suspicious coworker, I might be thinking, I wonder why that's covered. So, what we need to remember is that we can do both. We can protect children and protect the reputation of the adults who are willing to serve our young people.
Awesome. Should I move to the next slide here?
Yeah, let's do it. Um, so we've talked about grooming a little bit, and we're going to get now into some definitions. And I love this image because it just illustrates so well what I'm trying to convey, which is that not one person is groomed, but a whole community. A myriad of individuals are groomed. Now, um, are they given gifts and that sort of thing? Not necessarily, but there's a sense of I'm building confidence and assurance in this individual. So I just love that image. We can go on to the next one. So when we think about grooming, we know that it is selective, it's intentional, it is incremental, and it's observable. So therefore, it's interruptible, which is that's the best news of this whole discussion tonight, is that once we know what to look for, we can actually step in and interrupt it, whether through reporting it or changing course, pulling our child out, or raising a red flag to get someone else's attention. Would you mind going to the next one?
Yeah. So
So,
these are the
yeah,
observable, I guess, behaviors here.
Yeah, so we're going to get into depth if we have time. So the formula for grooming, as was taught to me by the predators I worked with, and then experiencing raising children in today's day and age, are the four F's: flattery, favoritism, forbidden fruits, and fear. And of course, these are not going to get into incredible specifics, and some people's situations might be a little different. Large, what I realized is that most individuals who have been sexually abused and the individuals who abuse use these same four tactics. So if you want to go to the next slide, we will we will learn that this is, I discussed this sort of being a trap earlier. This idea that we get on a conveyor belt, sort of this downward spiral. And I'm not going to focus as much on touching, because what we need to remember is this is a psychological process. This is less of a process of, then they touch them at this time and they don't touch them at this time. And I really want us to think more globally about grooming as a concept. So if you go to
Okay.
the next slide, Unless there are questions, I'm happy to take a question break before we get into the.
Uh, no, we're good. Let's keep going, and we've got plenty of
Okay,
time. There's no rush.
okay, good. So the first stage is flattery. We discussed the fact that grooming is a perverse form of courtship. So, why do I describe it like a perverse form of courtship? Because hopefully, some of your listeners may remember when courtship was the term that was used. Hopefully, you've experienced courtship. You've either been the courter or you've been the courtee.
Mhm.
And how did you court your wife, Gavin?
I
What
put out all my big
on
peacock feathers.
the very beginning? What did you do at the very beginning?
Um, wow, that is a great question. I think the very first thing I did was I was just friendly.
Okay,
Yeah, I
so
was a friendly person.
friendly person. So courtship is not aggressive, it's not violent, it's not oppressive. Courtship, because it's the process of wooing somebody.
Hmm.
We're really going back now with words.
I love it.
So
Yeah.
grooming is a perverse form of courtship is really hits the nail on the head because it is a process of falling in love with a potential target and not love like healthy love between two consenting adults who are, age appropriate and consenting, etc. But love in the sense of manipulation. So when we're thinking about this, we need to remember that grooming is going to start with flattery. Online, this is going to look like, oh, that was such a good shot you made in the Rocket League game, or, oh, I really like the
Mm.
game you put up on Roblox. I'd love to make a game with you. If it's a coach in an in-person sport, you might have them say, wow, I think this child is incredibly talented and I hope you'll stay for the whole season and I'd really like to work with them in the future. And these are things that not only inflate the perception of that individual in the child, but they also do it to us as the parents. And if you are a parent listening to this and you might think, oh, yeah, it feels really good when someone compliments my child. And that's completely normal and appropriate. But what we need to remember is that flattery here is where we begin that process of shaping a relationship for the future because they're not going to start off mean or aggressive or violent. And it almost goes back to that discussion we had earlier about the stranger in the van. These are normally people that you know. They're normally people that you've trusted to coach, to tutor, to instruct, to lead spiritually or lead physically. So it's really, really important that we highlight here that these are these are dynamic, charismatic individuals who are choosing to be around children and paying constant attention to the possible children that they may be interested in grooming. Do you mind going to the next one?
Not at all.
So, it's very important for predators to befriend me as a parent. And we all kind of understand why that is, right? I'm not going to leave my child with somebody that I don't trust.
Yeah.
And if they have my buy in, then I am the one who grants access and space with my child. So, going
Hmm.
back to that gas model example, we've got to be thinking about is this somebody who is giving excessive admiration over my family or over my child? Is this someone who's spending a lot of time looking at my child? Are they looking at my child's body? Are they wanting to take pictures of my child? There are some very overt things that predators might do at this time. Oh, I'd love to take your picture. Oh, will you send me a picture? These are not even erotic images, right? This is
Yeah.
simply saying, gosh, you're so attractive, you're so athletic. Wow, you look so good in that football uniform. You look so good in that cheerleading costume. I'd really love to have a picture of you like that. So, if you're conscientious also of the fact that children, take us out of it for a minute as parents. But what are children seeking by and large, Gavin?
Um,
What do children want?
uh, I don't love, I guess, like friendship, maybe. I
Yeah,
don't know.
love, attention, affection, recognition,
Sure.
validation. So when an individual, let's say that, for some children, they live in a household with plenty of love and compliments and all sorts of wonderful, soft things. There are also some children who grow up in an environment where they've never been told they're smart. They've never been told they're creative or capable. And these individuals may have increased vulnerability to somebody who shows up and says, "Wow, I've never seen anyone draw like you do. Would you draw me a picture? Oh, I'm going to take your picture home and I'm going to frame it." To a
Mm.
child, that is only going to boost not only themselves and their self perception, but it's also going to boost that other individual in their minds.
Yeah. So from our perspective, our job is to be on the lookout for this sort of stuff. Actually, it's really hard to be honest about your own child sometimes. Like for
Well
example,
said.
we have I'm going to take our oldest son. He wanted to play baseball, and it turned out that he just out of luck got on the championship team. They ultimately went on to win the championship. It had nothing to do with him. I had not brought him up playing baseball, right? It wasn't a thing. And so and maybe it's because I'm getting old, I'm able to be honest. I'm like, poor kid is just, he really thinks that so I think in that kind of situation, if somebody was flattering him about how great of a baseball player he was, I could be honest with myself and say, my BS meter is going off here. He is not a great
Mhm.
baseball player or something like that. I mean, is there a level of honesty that we have to have about our children in order to recognize when flattery is happening?
I think awareness of what an outlier behavior this is, because you've seen your children in other sports where, the coach is like, "Come on, everybody, get on the field, do the thing,"
Yeah.
and they're given orders and they're not given extra attention. They're not having
Yes.
somebody who wants to just work one on one with them or, take a photo of them or watching them intently across the field. So it
It's
becomes more
outlier
obvious
behavior.
as it's outlier behavior. Yeah, we're really looking at, like, by and large, are all the adults acting this way? No. Then I'm curious. Am I calling this person a predator? No. Am I in tune with this person? Am I going to go up and introduce myself and make sure that I'm visible and present, and not only present in the sense of a physical sense, but making sure that they know that I'm there and that I'm a cornerstone in the life of my child and that we have a close bond. Because the best protection for a child is actually the relationships they have with their close adults inside their home, whether that's parents, foster parents, grandparents. So it's critically important that we do our work to set a foundation that says you don't have to seek attention and affection and confirmation out in the world, because you get that at home. And unfortunately, it's a lottery based on who you're
Yeah.
born to.
Yeah.
So this is just a little tiny summary to be thinking about. I love to spend time with my children, but I'm always curious about who wants to befriend my child, who wants to become a confidant with my child, who wants to be a pal with my child. Obviously every title comes with certain roles and responsibilities, but if they're going outside of those roles and responsibilities, then I'm even more curious about what they're seeking in the relationship, not only with myself or my spouse, but with my child. So that's just a little something for your audience to be keeping in mind. Who
All
wants
right.
to be a buddy to my child?
Gotcha.
So favoritism is the second F of this formula, and favoritism does a couple of things. Imagine a group of children at a school, and a teacher identifies one as being her favorite. This person gets to, back in my day, clean the chalkboards.
Hmm.
Today, it might be wiping down a whiteboard. They might get to stay and have lunch with the teacher during the time that all the other children are in the cafeteria, for example. Um, Favoritism is going to create a little bubble around the child from their peers. And you know what happens to the teacher's pet typically from all the other kids? What do? Do they normally lean
No,
into
they get,
that child?
yeah, they tease the child. Sure. Yeah.
That's right. So that child is isolated from their peer group,
Mm,
typically. And one of the things that is going to be a hallmark that we're going to go back to throughout tonight and then in subsequent nights is this theme of isolation. Predators need to isolate their targets. You know, you've seen this when you look at packs of animals who are chasing through the savannas. They have to
right.
get that animal alone. The animals that have a system of building walls around the more vulnerable ones, the more vulnerable animals, are more protected than those where everybody's just running, and if you can't keep up, you get left behind. So it's critically important that we remember: is anyone trying to or has anyone identified my child as their favorite player, their favorite student, their favorite altar boy, their favorite neighbor in the community?
Hmm.
Because these are ways in which we've promoted that relationship to say, you're my special person. Oh, so if I'm your special person, then there may be things that come along with that that are um, not all good. And unfortunately, to a child, they might see that as a promotion. They might see that as getting recognition that before was not existing in their environment, or they might see that as something that is um, something that they've desperately wanted. You know,
Yeah.
children have and desire that attention and recognition as well. So we need to just be attuned to that.
All right.
Um,
Oh,
these
sorry.
individuals, yeah, you're good.
All right.
Um, Through favoritism, you're going to see things like singling them out. Oh, I'm going to give you gifts, right? We hear this all the time. And many people I talk to and speak to say, oh, well, they're going to give gifts. Sure. But we need to really widen our definition of what that is. Because if you're a kid who doesn't come from a lot of money, if I give you lunch, that's a gift, right? If
Hmm.
I give you money, if I give you physical, tangible gifts, and not all gifts are physical gifts. So, some gifts, if I'm well positioned in my religious community or if I'm well positioned in my academic community, I might be able to promote you to give you leadership opportunities or to give you other opportunities like but one of the central things around these gifts is often increased time with that individual. So, for example, predator, one of the predators I counseled would gift his target the opportunity to come with him on camping trips. Now,
Oh, wow.
nobody else in the religious group was offered this, but just this one boy was offered this.
Talk about
So,
space
in
and
the
access, right?
right.
Ooh.
So when we think about the family's response, who's saying, "Well, we really like this religious leader. We think they're wonderful, and he's really taken a shine to you, and this is a really wonderful opportunity for you to get this mentorship and this coaching and this experience." Oftentimes this is where the assurances that have been built, if they are established, they get to be used. So, not all gifts are physical, tangible gifts. They could be promotions. So, in sports, we'll often see this with, letting the child be promoted to a small group of kids who has to come and work on extra coaching at the coach's house, for
Mm,
example. Again, we've got to isolate, we've got to pare down the group, and we've got to bring that child away from supervision and other adults who may see something as not quite right.
wow. Wow. Scary.
So then we get on to the third one. I know your audience is doing such a good job tolerating
No, this
my
is fascinating.
here. Um, but the third F in the formula is forbidden fruits. Now, this is where uh, I find this fascinating because this is where the predators will entice a child, again, using their developmental stage often, and saying, oh, well, I know your parents say you can't have this, but in my classroom, you can have this. Or I know that, you know, the wine at communion time is only used for this, but when you're with me, you can drink this wine. These individuals will create environments. They will make available things like explicit material. They might provide things like, R-rated movies compared to PG movies. That's, sort of that's a silly example, but you get that idea that
Yeah,
that
especially for
individual
children.
saying,
Sure.
when you're with me, those rules don't count. When you're with me in our special time, we get to do things that you don't normally have permission to do. And it's going against all of those normative rules that are in your household, your community, your religious environment. I mean, this is highly exploited in religion. So I think it's really, really important that we think about that. But when we think about the role of forbidden fruits, and you can go on to the next slide, is that it isolates the child from their caregivers. So in favoritism, we isolated the child from their peer group. In forbidden fruits, this is where we say, oh, well, you broke mom's rule. Do you really want to tell your mother that you drank alcohol with me, that you vaped, that you smoked, that you used drugs? And if you're a child, you're thinking, well, I'm curious about those things. And you're my pal and my confidant and my buddy. And, you treat me like I'm an adult. You treat me like I'm a peer of yours. And you're letting me do these things. So this is, again, one of those points where when you said at the beginning, like, it's really difficult to decipher, by and large, safe adults are not going to allow your child to be breaking rules that you uphold for your family and your household. And if an adult is doing those things, that is an enormous issue that needs immediate attention. So here we have this idea that we're challenging the prevailing concepts of what is religiously accepted, what's accepted in our community, what's accepted in our school. Oftentimes relationships that predators try to build with a potential target are started within normal settings like school or activities or sports. And then the predator is the one to take the child out of those environments. You've seen this with the cases that you've been following.
Yeah.
The teacher who takes the child home for lunch or for parties or something like that. It's not that the abuse is occurring on school grounds or even during school time necessarily, but it is the idea that when you're with me, you get to do things that everybody else has said you can't do. And if I'm a child, the biggest promotion that I can give to my children in my house is moving them from the kid table to the adult table at Thanksgiving, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So imagine that's the sort of concept that I want your audience to be thinking about is these individuals. Yeah.
Well, how do we get, since this would be happening in a place where we are not in I guess, okay, Gavin, think this through. If the forbidden fruit stage is happening out of our presence, how do we work with our children to be able, like, what do we ask them? What do those conversations look like in order to find out, did you watch an R-rated movie? Did you drink alcohol? Were you vaping? Was nobody else there? How do we have those conversations?
Yeah. Well, I think we have them in advance of the situation happening. So in my family, I love to role play and imagine situations that might come up and then have the opportunity to talk about how we might handle it. So this is true whether or not you're dealing with other adolescents doing behaviors that are harmful to themselves or to others. And it's also true if it's a trusted adult. So if a child's spending time with a family member, you might remind the adults of what the expectations are and the rules and so forth. And you might remind the child too that no matter who you are spending time with, the same family rules, the same family expectations follow you in that environment. And anybody who loves you and cares about you for real is not going to do things to harm you or to encourage you to break rules that are there to keep you safe and protected. And
That's good
children
advice.
get that. They understand that. And one of the things that I've been working on is a kid's book about grooming because we fail to realize just how much kids are aware of. Now, they may not use our same wording. They might call it weird, or they might say like, it's sort of icky, or,
Yeah.
I get a strange feeling in my tummy when I'm around this person. But if we don't make space to have those conversations, then we may never know. And I think what's really important here in this, the last line in this slide, is that oftentimes predators will use peer pressure. So one of the predators I counseled would host parties at their house for the entire team at the end of the season. And during that, it was a sleepover, of course. And during those sleepovers, he would molest a certain amount of the children who were there. Now, why does that matter? Because we often think, oh, well, as long as it's not one-on-one, then our kids are safe. But we also need to educate them, to your point earlier, that just because other kids are around or other adults are around doesn't mean that they have your best interest at heart. And we need to do a really good job in our households and get over our own discomfort to have that conversation and say, nobody should be doing these sorts of things at any time. Doesn't matter who they are, doesn't matter how much I love them, it doesn't matter what role they have in our lives. That's unacceptable. So if those conversations haven't happened, this is a good catalyst for that.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah. And the fourth and final stage is fear. So we haven't talked a whole lot about fear or threats. Remember how we started. Perverse courtship starts with flattery. So I've got to woo you and I've got to rope you in. But by the end, I'm saying things like, do you really think God is going to love you when he finds out what you've done with me? Do you really think your parents are going to believe you when you tell them that I've been doing these things? You know that they trust me and I've been tutoring you for this long. The amount of psychological power that a predator has by the time the fourth stage has happened is enormous, because they have isolated the child from their caregivers and built in the sense that they are responsible for what the predator has done. Remember at the beginning, I said the predator is the one who's solely responsible. It's not a child's responsibility not to look at pornography if it's made available to them. We would hope that they wouldn't, but their developmental stage is such that they're curious and they might be interested and they might look at something. And then they're going to do a far better job of shaming themselves and holding on to guilt than any punishment could ever do, because they have been convinced by someone that they had assurance in, by someone who gained their confidence, that these things were acceptable. All to get to the stage 4, which is nobody will believe you, nobody will trust you, you're on your own, kid. And this is where we might see that the child is really confused about the relationship. They might have previously thought this individual was safe, and now they understand this person is dangerous. I think it's really important that we're attuned to this idea that the predators will often take the role of the caregivers and say, well, they didn't really love you. They didn't really care about you. I'm the one who cares about you. I'm the one who's been coaching you, tutoring you, helping you with this thing. I've been the one visiting you. I'm the one who cares about you. And this happens, we've been talking about this, but it happens in a gradual way in real life. And online, this process happens lightning fast, because a predator has got to gain a child's assurance and confidence, and then build them up, and then be able to engage them in an activity that will build shame and guilt in the child, not because the child has earned that, but because the predator knows that in stage 4, they can use it against them.
So I have a question about this. I have a couple questions, actually. First is, we've been talking about children specifically here, but it seems to me like this is the same kind of coercive behavior that predators use for their adult victims as well. I think about like Micah Frances Miller, the coercive control that they have alleged against her husband, J.P. Miller. And so, I don't know, that made my mind go down a certain path here. It's a truism, I guess, that the most dangerous time for an abuse victim, let's say like a domestic abuse victim, The most dangerous time is when they decide that they're going to leave. And you talked about, this is in this stage. Is this a dangerous time? Because I'm wondering, is the child, uh, as the predator, would I be wondering, is this child going to tell somebody? Are they going to spill the beans? Are you going to let our secret out? Do I really have that control over them? Is this that dangerous time where it goes from sexual predation to like homicide? Is that where we are in the process here?
I think you're on the right track. And one of the things that I think is so critical about having this conversation is that the grooming concept is relevant whether you're 15 or whether you're 18 and you're after the age of consent. You're past the age of consent, but you're in your first job or you're in college and a college professor is, coming on to you and things like that. These are tactics that a predator will use again and again. And I think for the purposes of our conversation, it's important to note that minors are a unique type of victim and a potential target for a child, for a predator. But I am really curious about this concept that if we allow this to go further and further, you will end up with a situation like the tragic case of Maddie Soto, because these predators know no bounds. And the one thing that they want to avoid at all cost is being found out. The predators I worked with went to extreme extents to lie, to cheat, to fabricate, just so that no one would find out what they were doing.
Well,
And we need to be,
when you
yeah,
read the emails between Stephen Stearns and his parents, it almost feels like he is relieved that he has been caught. Okay, it's happened, and now the world knows who I am. I can talk about it. That's the way it kind of feels to me. So he spent the most of his life like working really hard on his camouflage, working very, very good at his predatory nature for the purpose of, well, his own gratification, I guess. We're getting into the why it doesn't really matter, but also his self-preservation.
that's
And
right. And
and
I
it,
I remember listening to one of the tapes in which he says that Maddie started it. And he was in a conversation with his
yeah,
parents, with his dad, and he said, "Well, Maddie started it." So again, this is where, and I would categorize that in that sort of forbidden fruit stage, right? Because kids are naturally curious about their bodies, about sex, sexuality. Nowadays, with the proliferation of porn and no fences put around that sort of material, children are getting exposure to illicit material at younger and younger ages.
yes,
So for him to state it was she started it is so in line with predatory logic.
wow, yeah,
Infuriating.
infuriating indeed. Yes,
So, a few reminders to caregivers. We're going to be looking out for any sort of sudden changes in a child. Suddenly having stomach cramps, can't sleep at night, not able to stay through a school day, interruptions in sleeping. We're going to see regressive behaviors, things like bedwetting, thumb sucking, using stuffies or comfort objects or items, maybe not being able to sleep through the night without you or without being in your room or without the lights on. Again, none of these are pinpointed. This is absolutely a sex abuse situation. But again, it's an opportunity to be curious and to lean into a conversation that says, I've noticed that now you're having trouble at school, or you're having, your grades have suddenly plummeted, or you're suddenly no longer interested in piano tutoring. What's going
yeah,
on with that? What's your experience been? And I think it's also really important when we remember how to communicate with children. It's not like having a board meeting with your adult peers. And so you need to come up with other tactics. So one of the tactics that's here on the page is give your child two options. Is it this or is it that? That can be helpful. Another tactic that's really useful is using pictures or drawing or acting so that the child can use a different set of skills that they might have. If it is something like, I remember I dealt with a family who was worried about sexual abuse within their school system, within the child's school day. So we made little tabs of every single part of that child's day, like getting up, getting to the bus, riding the bus, getting to school, walking into the classroom. And we had 3 different buckets. We had a red bucket, a yellow bucket, and a green bucket. And every part of his day was broken up so that he got to decide okay, yeah, I feel good about getting on the bus. I feel good about this. Because the parent was saying, well, I don't know what part of the day or what part of the experience they're upset about. So that's just another tactic that families can use to
Yeah.
help illustrate, because having a conversation with a child is like walking in the woods at night with no flashlight.
Yeah, like trying to get them to express something that they don't have the vocabulary or the vocabulary or the emotional understanding to be able to verbalize it anyway, right? That's
That's right.
that's tough.
And we don't. I mean, think about how many adults who are on the receiving end of that sort of information have the proper response, are able to stay calm, are able
Yeah.
to take the next appropriate action. Now, if that's my lover, if that's my spouse, if that's my partner, if that's somebody who I rely on financially inside my home, which was the situation with Jennifer Soto. These are scenarios that are not in a vacuum, and we need to keep that in mind when we conceptualize this idea of grooming. We need to remember that people's lives are interrelated and interconnected, and we have the opportunity to observe more keenly and look out for things that are outliers. Again, most people are not giving your kids drugs. Most people are not interested in uh, um, identifying your child as their favorite. But
Yeah.
when they do, that's time for you to lean in and be curious. And this last slide, which I think is an important just takeaway lesson to anyone who may be left through my ramblings,
No, this is
is
terrific.
that predators go out of their way to create secrets. So if you haven't already, have a discussion to distinguish the difference between privacy, secrecy, and surprise, because those are all very different concepts and ones that children can understand. Privacy, that's things like what the doctor tells you at your pediatric checkup. It's what's on your report card. It's the location of our key outside our house. Those things are private. Surprises are things that we withhold from certain people for a limited amount of time in order to experience joy. So surprises are never negative things unless you're an adult who's had a surprise party thrown for you. But
One
by
too
and
many
large,
times. Yeah.
surprises in the eyes of children are well understood. We're not going to tell daddy about this because it's a surprise. It's not a secret, it's a surprise. And predators who I worked with and speaking with adult survivors tell me again and again that they were carrying, they had a boulder on their shoulders of information that they could not tell anyone. So secrets are a no-go. And this also plays an important role when we think about the fact that the majority of the time when children tell someone about child sexual abuse, they will often tell a peer. So you may be listening and thinking, well, this is not an issue in our household, but let me tell you, let's go ahead and have this conversation, because your child might have a friend on the playground, on the bus, at your religious community, in your neighborhood, who says, I have a secret. There's something that happens in my household, or there's something that happens when my grandparents visit, and I can't tell anybody, but I'm going to tell you this secret. I want there to be a big red flag in your child's mind to know, oh, I have to tell secrets to my parents or my caregivers or my foster parents or my grandparents, because secrets are where predators build and inflate their power and influence, and we need to decrease that.
That's terrific. Terrific. And I love being able to talk about what the difference, because I think for a child, the key hidden outside the house is a secret, right? So yeah, that's
That's
that's a
right.
great
But it's private.
that's a
Yeah,
great
it doesn't need to be
example.
a secret. It
Yeah.
needs to be private.
The,
So keeping in mind that gas is where we need to focus our attention. It's that intersection of grooming, access, and space. And I'm so grateful to you, Gavin, for giving me the opportunity to share with your community and be here for this really important
well,
conversation. And
I'm
my
really
little
glad you
my
did.
little soapbox.
I'm really glad you did. And we're going to do this next Wednesday and the following Wednesday because we've divided this up into 3 pieces. I'm I love the conversation that we've had. One of the things that I really strive to do here on the channel, Anna, man, I've gotten off. I don't know how I did that. Is that we shouldn't just be true crime aficionados because we like to be horrified by horrible things that happen in the world. We want to be able to learn something. And this is an excellent opportunity for us to learn. I want to run over to see what people have said in super chats. Actually, you know what? I think most people have just been listening. It's pretty great. But I wanted to just give a special thank you. I'm pushing all the wrong buttons. To Michelle for her super chat, Danny for hers, Mooney, who's our OG. She says, I really appreciate Anna being here with us tonight, and I think that she's speaking for a lot of folks. LG Rescues, thank you very much for that super sticker. Man, the winner of the super chat contest tonight was Susan Lewis. Susan says, as a survivor, I have trouble wrapping my head around the spouse of a sexual abuser who stays in the relationship. What drives that decision?
Oh, I'm not sure we have time for that answer. I'll try it. I think when we evaluate people's motivations for being in the partnerships they're in, they are often mired by their previous experiences, their own childhood experiences, their expectations, and their time together, their history. So I actually had a really interesting case that I was working on with an elderly man and his wife, and he had molested 3 generations of their daughters. So he molested their daughter, their biological daughter. He molested one of the biological daughter's daughters, and then he molested the great granddaughter. Now, this spouse stayed throughout the whole ordeal. And at no time was there any consideration that the children might be right. And what we have to remember.
She knew about it during that time?
Well, what we have to remember is that people can put up blinders to information, or they may not be able to see things, right? You know, think about that in your own household, right? I walk into my house and there's something that's ajar in the kitchen and I don't see it because it's been like that for so long, right? Or something that is in your environment that you have just accepted as the reality. And the motivation to stay with a sexual predator is unfathomable to most of us. And yet, when you look at things like intrafamily abuse, you often see that couples stay together and that partners don't often know what to do. They're going to lose either way. And the facing the reality that a crime has been committed and then losing the partnership and having to move out on your own, etc., might just be too much for somebody to face. And I would argue that when we go back to what you were saying, Gavin, about these themes feel very similar to domestic violence and the DV work that I used to do. I don't think we can necessarily separate that spouse was picked for a reason. And it might have been that there were vulnerabilities with that adult woman at the time of the wedding, at the time of the marriage, and that it was easier to ignore the enormous red flags about what was happening with their own children. But many survivors I talked to were disbelieved by the people that they would have thought would most come to their rescue. So it's incredibly important that we get educated. It's incredibly important that we remind our children and the kids that we care about in our lives that we'll believe them no matter what. It's really as simple as that. They can come to us with anything about anyone.
Thank you for that. Awesome. And Linda Briggs, thank you very much for that super chat. So Susan, through Anna's generosity, we have a audio version of Duck Duck Groom that I will get to you if you will reach out through the website, or actually I think Susan and I are in direct contact. So we'll, if you can just reach out, I will make sure that that happens. And then we will be back next Wednesday to continue the conversation. I'll give you the final word. Anything else that you want to drop on us before we call it a night?
Well, I just want to thank your incredible audience for supporting you, supporting your show, supporting this idea, and helping this clinician on a mission who's trying to get a sea change out there. That if we're going to really move the needle on protecting children, we must make greater focus and effort to seeing grooming occur. And our best strategy for protecting our kids is to show up, look up, and speak up. And I'm so excited to engage in this conversation again next week. And I can't wait to hear the questions that will come up at that time.
I'm looking forward to it too. So if you have been watching, by the way, guys, because of the way we've been doing this, I have not been watching the live chat where you're putting, GF in. I haven't been watching it, but just a quick scan of it, Anna, and I think that we've got a lot of positive comments, a lot of good discussion that's been happening over here, including Mooney, who's like, let me just give you a couple just quick ones to make you feel good for the night, right? We love this, Anna. Robin says, our guest is wicked smart and fantastic at delivering the information. There's just tons of these. Tons of these. So
Thank you, Gavin, because it wouldn't be possible without you giving time and space outside of your normal programming. So I'm grateful for the opportunity, and I'm just so excited that we're getting another opportunity to continue this discussion and talk about access and what unique available spaces come up as we explore this issue in the coming weeks.
All right. Well, thank you. I appreciate you coming on. If you'll stick with me for just a second, let me do this little outro and then I'll be back with you. Okay. Give me just 1 second. Guys, I really hope that you did like this programming. I know it's a break from what we normally do here on the channel, but again, I really want to make this channel a place of learning, a place where we can grow ourselves as people. We can help maybe prevent some of the horrible crimes that we just kind of seem to accept as being part of our society. Quick little reminder that you can reach out to me. Susan, reach out to me by going to gavinfish.com. There's a link down below. Anybody can reach out to me using this contact form, but Susan and I will get you that audiobook. If you're on Facebook, please head on over to the Fish Tank. This is you're cordially invited to join us over in the Fish Tank. We talk about all things true crime over there. And then maybe the last thing that I would bring up is CrimeCod. Go to crimecod.com. That's our true crime website. With that, guys, thank you for being here. We'll be back tomorrow night. And until then, I bid you adieu, and we'll see you on the next one. Bye-bye. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you liked what you saw, please consider subscribing. And if you have any questions or comments, please leave them below.